Hi, I'm Jon Leland, Vice President of Insights at Kickstarter. I've worked at Kickstarter for over 6 years, and I currently lead all research, analytics, data science, and strategy development. Kickstarter, if you are not familiar, is the world's largest crowdfunding platform for creative projects. We define creative projects very broadly, so we support everything including dance, theater, fine arts, to video games, board games, design objects, consumer products, technology projects like 3D printers and virtual reality machines. We also have apparel, comic books, films, music, journalism. We've had more than 180,000 projects successfully fund on the platform, and just a few days ago, we surpassed $5 billion pledged all time to projects on the platform since our launch in 2009. That is several times more than the National Endowment of the Arts has given out over the same period. With such a broad community of creators, we have a unique lens on how the coronavirus is impacting creative communities broadly. And during this period, I've been leading our analysis of how the crisis has been impacting our business and our users and helping craft our long-term strategy of how to respond. I'll walk you through some of the acute challenges that we're facing, including data and research we haven't shared anywhere else, and some of the opportunities we see on the other side. So starting with the business, we've seen project volume as the number of campaigns just on our site fall 35% from pre-COVID levels. So we would normally have about 4,000 or more projects live at this time of year, and we're currently under 3,000 live projects at this point. So that's obviously a significant drop. And we're seeing that across all categories. However, the less consumer-driven, the more creative type categories have been impacted the most, and the ones that are dependent on physical spaces for performance or recording have been particularly impacted. So food has taken a substantial decline, obviously, because restaurants and even commercial kitchens have been closed. Music has been hard hit as musicians cannot record in studios and can't perform in most venues. Film has been severely disrupted as it's very hard to shoot anything at this time. You can really basically only do editing. And the arts have taken a hit, particularly in dance and theater, which have become virtually impossible. The categories which have done the best to date have been design, technology, and games and publishing, where you can continue to work on a lot of these projects and develop them under quarantine conditions and still often maneuver to manufacture and distribute goods, even if there are disruptions within that process. So live projects have declined. We've actually seen a record pledge volume on the site. So this is a bit of a paradox. We have far fewer projects, but far more money coming into the platform than we've ever seen before over the last few weeks. So our pledge volume definitely took a hit with COVID around week 11 of the year, which you can see on this chart, but it rebounded after a few weeks and has been quite strong over the last several weeks. And so the way this discrepancy works is that for us, live projects under $100,000, we've seen take this big nosedive and had a hard time recovering, where live for projects over $100,000, we've actually seen more of those projects since COVID. And so those large projects are bringing in a lot of revenue to sort of cover for the decline in smaller projects. And the factors driving their successful fundraising, we've determined are digital marketing prices. So those are really low right now. Facebook ads and things like that can provide really good ROI for creators that leverage those kinds of tools. People are spending just more time and money online under quarantine conditions. So for creators that are trying to get in front of an audience that is online, this is actually a great time to be working. Creators are also being more creative. So in terms of what they're leveraging to engage their audience and make ends meet. So we have more creators turning to platforms like Kickstarter if their physical space distribution, so if they were distributing through stores, that's no longer an option. So they're turning to platforms like Kickstarter, raise money, or distribute their products. And while many people are facing significant hardships due to the crisis, and we'll talk about how it's impacting creators, people who have maintained their income often have more money to spend right now because they aren't spending as much by going out, and are frequently feeling very generous from what we've seen. So we wanted to understand what's happening with our community a little bit more deeply, and so we surveyed them. We surveyed 264 creators who've had a successful campaign in the last 3 years. Most of these creators are from the US, 84%, and they really represent the broad swath of and broad diversity of creators on our platform. And what we found was creators are hurting. So one of the things we asked them about is how COVID-19 has impacted a number of aspects of their work. Over 80% of creators that we surveyed reported disruption to their operations or logistics, with about 50% saying it was very disruptive. So that is just a significant blow to the fundamental ways that creative people kind of work on their projects. Creators are having a hard time balancing creative work with their other obligations. I think this isn't just true for creatives, but as we've had to transition and change our lives, it's been very difficult balancing creative work with family and other work and just transitioning in this crisis. They're also feeling less confident about the success of their work, and they're having to evolve. About half of creators are changing the scope of their work in the face of this crisis, and more than 30%, about a third of all creators, are actually changing the content itself of the work that they're making in response to the crisis, because they have to adapt to what is now happening in the culture. COVID-19 has also delayed timelines across the board for all phases of creative work. So we're seeing, or we're hearing from them that they're being delayed in planning new projects and launching existing projects and completing projects currently underway. So all of these are significantly disrupted and then delayed as a result of COVID-19. And that's very difficult for creators that rely on their work as their primary or secondary income source. Particularly when 73% of creators report a loss of personal income they need for creative work. That is a staggering percentage. I think the jobs that have been cut in this crisis, which have been things like drivers, wait staff, service workers of all kinds, museum staff have been particularly hard hit. These are positions that frequently creative people rely on to support themselves and their development of their practice. And that is a terrifying number. 55% report a loss in external funding, and 38% are reporting an increase in project costs and expenses. So while they're seeing less money coming in, they're actually having more expenses in order to complete their work. So of the 55% of creators who reported loss of external funding, most of those expect those losses to be really substantial. The majority are expecting losses of over 40% of their current external funding for work. This is, again, really concerning for us. From our end, if a creator has run a Kickstarter campaign and promised to make work to their backers, and they're relying on external funding as a piece of that financing puzzle to make their work, and that's going away, particularly with such a huge cut, it's going to be really hard for them to complete the work that they've promised to their community. So we also asked all these creators what they want from us. And I don't think the answers here will be too surprising. At least they aren't surprising to us, because these are things that we tend to hear from creators. But publicity, lower fees, we charge 5% on all money raised on the platform, and just help with funding. Those are the big three. And for Kickstarter, publicity goes hand in hand with funding. So both of those, all three of these from our end, point to just how much in need creators are for additional sources of funding and additional support. Given that there have been so many delays and reports of delays amongst our creators, we asked what are things that could help accelerate their creative work. And again, funding is the top thing on that list. Time is another big one, which I don't know what we can exactly what we can do there. Market demand and just opportunities for their work to meet an audience is just huge. So those being the big three, again, it speaks to the financial burden that creators are facing in this crisis, and the challenge that they have as their process and forms of distribution are disrupted. How do you get access to that to an audience now if normally you were reaching them in a theater or through a comic book shop or through a bookstore? As we look to the future, we see a few things. One is that the devastating impact of the crisis on independent creators will continue to have ripple effects over the next year. I think a lot of creators are going to struggle to make ends meet. They're going to have to adapt, and that's going to continue to be disruptive to their livelihoods and their work. We know that creative work is being delayed, but we are already seeing creators adapt to the new limitations of this period and the new paradigm. We're expecting actually an expansion of creative work in about 6 to 12 months as creators respond to this moment. There's so much happening in our society and culture at the moment, not just COVID, but the social unrest we're experiencing. I have helicopters hovering over my apartment at the moment as I record this. And we're already seeing creators wanting to respond to the moment. And historically, throughout American history, moments like this have generated quite a bit of creative work. And finally, we know that creators will need significant support. They're going to need increased opportunities for unrestricted funding. The unrestricted there is very important. They're going to need new methods for creating, given the concerns around COVID-19. Particularly if the restrictions here continue or we're moving in and out of quarantine, we're going to have to find new ways to help creators make things and give them new avenues to find their audience and connect with them and share work. Because as we've seen, venues shutting down, spaces closing, we have to find new ways to support creators as they make work in this environment. So the opportunities that we see for ourselves and for organizations that are also thinking about supporting creators and creative work are to find new ways to provide direct and unrestricted funding to artists to support their lives or their work at scale. This is huge. The unrestricted piece is really important, and the at scale piece is really important. So organizations like United States Artists is doing a great job of this. They have a relief fund. They're doing grants, I think about $5,000 grants directly to artists just to support them during this time, just to help them make ends meet. It's unrestricted, it just goes in their pockets. And that's such a great project and fund because of the scale they're operating at. I'd much rather see, 100 artists get $5,000 than 5 artists get $100,000. It's just so much more important to spread those financial resources broadly to help the creators and communities of creators, because communities are so important here, get through this period. At Kickstarter, we are exploring partnerships with nonprofits and foundations to spin up a fund that would do something very similar, leveraging Kickstarter and our model to put small amounts of money into campaigns across our platform to help creators raise money through Kickstarter, give them a boost, and put a spotlight on their work. We know communities want to help save the creative work and spaces that matter to them, both the local communities and communities of interest, of fans of work. So it's on us, the organizations that support those creators, to provide dignified opportunities for them to get support from community networks. That dignified piece is really important, and I think one that we know a lot of creators have struggled with during this period as GoFundMe type campaigns, which are really like charity, support us with nothing in return, sort of holding out your hat, has been really difficult for a lot of creators who don't feel comfortable with that mechanism of support and mechanism of giving. So we've launched initiatives to help organizations sort of fundraise, but putting a focus on their work and the creative aspects of their work rather than the need aspect of the moment. And I think um, any organization working in the space needs to really understand how they're providing a dignified um, method of support for these creators. And finally, just a note here that creative work that brings small groups together, either online or in person, is really powerful right now. Tabletop games is exploding on the platform. We're seeing interactive online theater starting to spin up watch parties for films. Finding ways to build these kinds of practices into your support for artists and helping them think through what their strategy is in this moment can be really helpful. So finding creators that are leveraging the moment and the way behaviors are changing amongst people and the way that they're consuming content and connecting with each other is really smart. So I'd encourage anyone that's working with artists to consider that as well. Thank you. That's it for me. Hopefully this is under time. I look forward to discussing all of these more with you in the panel during the conference. And thank you very much for listening.